Just say a couple words.
Okay,
Perfect, I can hear you. All right, why don't we start with you giving me your name?
okay. I'm Geneva Belle Browne, but I only used the B because when I was a little girl, my sister used to call it Belly because it was Belle. So I just changed it and didn't use the Belle. I just put Geneva B. Browne. And we have an E on the end of the name Browne. And that took place with my husband's generation because they decided that it wasn't classy enough to be just plain Brown. So they put an E on the end of it. And so in the cemetery in Geneva, you will find that some of the relatives are just plain Brown and the others are with an E, but that's why. And of course, when we had our children, we had the E on the end of the name, so it's legal for all of our children to be Browne. And so anyway, I was born January 1st, 1929, so I'm 91 and a half. I'm back to my halvesies. Like the kids are always 1.5 or 2.5. Well, I'm 91 and a half. So anyway, and I was born in Windsor, Illinois, and my family were farmers. My grandfather had a big farm, and I can remember back when I was just a very little girl, we would have family get-togethers at my grandparents' house, and everybody would bring a dish to pass, and we would make ice cream, and we had two big tubs that they would put ice in, and then the churn would be in the center of that, and we all took turns turning the crank, but they had two of them because there were so many of us, and we all had to take turns turning the crank to make the ice cream. And my grandfather, I can remember, made sorghum molasses. He would raise his own sugar cane, and then they had a press that was a round circle that screwed down and put pressure on and squeezed the juice out of the sugar cane. And a horse, of course, pulled it around. And when they got all the juice out of it, the pulp that was left, they would put in a pile, and they called that the pummy pile. Why it was a pummy, I don't know. But anyway, they had the pummy pile, and of course there were always bees around there. But then they had this big long trough that they had fire underneath and got this hot. And they had a little paddle, and they would push the juice this way and this way and this way and this way. And by the time it got to the end, it was cooked and it was sorghum molasses. And it would pour into a container at the end of the thing. And then they would put that in, pour it into buckets, gallon buckets. And it was my job to put labels on the buckets, and they would sell the sorghum molasses. But anyway, they were very nice memories of when we were children. And I can remember my uncle, the youngest one, was going on a date, and he was riding his horse. Of course, there were no cars, and he preferred the horse rather than a buggy. And I can remember going to my grandma's house for Thanksgiving or Christmas. It was always very cold. And my mother would take a flat iron and put it on the stove and get it warm and wrap it in a towel and put it at our feet so our feet wouldn't freeze when we were on our way to my grandma's house. And my grandfather was a preacher, and he would always say the prayer, and sometimes they would ask different ones to say the prayer. Grandpa didn't always say it. And I can remember that we would hope that somebody else would say it, because when it was Grandpa's turn to say it, he thanked God for the crops, for the horses, the animals, the pigs that we butchered, and it just went on, and we felt like we were never going to get to eat our food because we all had to sit there and wait for him to get through with this prayer. But it was fun, and I had an Aunt Faith that was of wonderful person, and she loved kids. And one time she asked us if we would like to join the Stuck Up Society. And so, of course, we all did. And so she had us get in a circle, and she said, now put your finger down here on the center of the circle. So we all did. And she says, now repeat after me. I know my heart. I know my mind. I know that I stick up behind. And then we were in the society. But we would have Easter egg hunts and just all kinds of things. She was always busy with things, and she would teach us to make things, and we would make a picture, color a picture, and then she would put black tape around it and make a frame, so we had a framed picture, and just all kinds of things. And then as my mother and her brother had a different mother. Her mother died from tuberculosis, and the only thing she remembered about her mother was that her mother would cough up a lot of blood, and she would ask my mother to throw away her rags because they didn't have Kleenex, was not invented yet, and so she would spit it up into rags, and my mother would remember throwing them away for her. And then she remembers that the day that of my grandma's funeral, they got her all dressed up, and she went out and played in the dirt, and she got in trouble. And she remembered that. But anyway, Grandpa met Grandma Emma. I don't know how he met her or where he met her, but she was from a wealthy family, and she was very educated, and she used to go to operas and just all kinds of things that the wealthy people did. And she was a wonderful woman, and she taught all of her children. They had 8 children. She had 6 of them, and then she took care of my mom and Uncle Tom, and included them just like they were her very own. And she taught all of them to play musical instruments. My mother played the organ, some played the organ and the piano, violin, guitars, just everything. How she knew all that, I don't know, but she did, and she taught them. And when Aunt Faith and Aunt Grace were teenagers, they had a friend, Francis Kreitzer, that lived down the road from them, and they would sing harmony together, just beautiful. And they got a job working on the radio on what they called the Saturday night barn dance, and they would sing, and they called themselves the Three Milkmaids. And I can remember they had red and white plaid dresses with big puff sleeves and an apron because they were the milkmaids. And they sang for a long time on the barn dance. But those are my memories from when I was little. And then I can remember that I had to milk cows before I went to school, and I would drive the horse and wagon up to the silo and put silage on the wagon and drive it out to feed the cattle, and things like that. And I can remember the butchering. They would hang the pigs by their feet, and they'd have a barrel that they had water in that they would heat, and they'd dip that hog into the water to loosen the skin and make it easy to peel it. But anyway, then when I was, I don't know, I think 7th or 8th grade, we moved up to the Fox River Heights between St. Charles and Elgin. And we lived there, and I went to the Littlewood School, and back in those days, the country schools had all 8 grades of the children in one room. And we had a coat room for the girls and a coat room for the boys. And I can remember when I was going to learn my multiplication tables, they would have some of the 8th graders that were caught up in their work to take us into the coat room and work with us on our multiplication tables and stuff. But all 8 grades were in the same room. And my sister Josie, she was the youngest one of the family. I can remember when she was in 1st grade. Of course, they didn't have kindergarten. She was in 1st grade, and they had these paste brushes that had the metal handle, and it was open on the top, so it was really kind of sharp, but they didn't worry about things like that in those days. And so the teacher said, now, we have brand new desks. And she said, I want all of you to take very good care of your desk and don't get it ruined. So Josie was pasting something, and she got paste on her desk. So she turned the handle over and was trying to scrape the paste off of the desk. And of course she scraped the wood on the desk. And the teacher came over and was so angry at her because she had made gouges in the wood, and she picked her up and gave her a good spanking. And all of us kids were so upset because our baby sister got a spanking the first day of school. It was terrible. But anyway, then I went to St. Charles High School for 1 year, and I still remember their school song. You want me to sing it for you?
Sure.
Here's to St. Charles High School, bring victory back. Here's to our colors, the orange and the black, da-da-da-da-da-da. Here's to all the fellows who bear our name, fighting to lick the foe and win this game. And then I went to Geneva High School for a year. Geneva, let's go, Geneva, let's go, to our opponents our strength show. Fight till the last and be steadfast till victory is ours. Rah, 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 you do your best and we'll do the rest on the sidelines cheering you. Geneva, let's go, yes, Geneva, let's go, till victory is ours. Yay! So anyway, it's funny how you remember those silly little songs even when you're in your 90s.
Do you know if they still sing that song?
Pardon me?
They still sing that same fight song.
Do they do? Oh, wonderful.
They do.
That's great. I imagine St. Charles probably does too. You know, they usually have one song that is the school song. But anyway, then we moved to Geneva, and my mother and dad bought a house in Geneva, and it was at the end of Illinois Street and Illinois and Eckland Avenue. And we had the corner house, and we had the lot, the big lot next door that there was nothing built on it, and so we had a lot of room to play and things. And my dad planted a garden out in the back, and Granquist lived next door to us, Herbie Granquist, that was the accordion teacher for years. And down the street from us was the Glazers. And Mr. Glazer had, during the war, he made these bridges and things. He built them in sections, and then they would take those and they could build a bridge across valleys and stuff in a hurry during the war. And I can remember that it was a very scary time because on one side of us we had Germany and the other side Japan, and they were all out to get us. And it was really very, very scary. And I can remember that the courthouse had a big board in the front lawn that daily they would have the draft board would put the names of the people that had been killed, that what they were notified that had been killed during the war. So everybody kept track of the billboard every day to see if any of their loved ones were listed. And of course, the military would send somebody to your door to let you know that your husband or whoever had been killed. And so anytime that there was a knock at the door and the military was there, you knew what you were going to face. It was very sad time. But when the war was over, they had they called it VE Day, which was Victory Europe Day, and we had what they called a snake dance. Everybody held on each other's waist, and we zigzagged all over town, singing songs and just cheering and grateful that the war was over on that side. And then we had VJ Day, and that one was kind of a mixed emotion one, because the atomic bomb was an awful, awful thing. And it, at one time, right after the war, the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago had a section where they would show the after effects of the atomic bomb. They took it away later on, and I don't know if they still have that, if you could see it, if you asked for it, I don't know. But they would show where the people that had the radiation fallout their flesh would just completely fall off of their face, and it would just be their bones that were left. And they were still living, and it was horrible, just horrible things. But of course there was no television during those days. That had not been invented yet. And so when you would go to the movies at the theater, they always had, before the show started, they would have different scenes of the war, things that were happening both in Japan and Germany. And the cruelty was just unbearable. It was just horrible. In Japan, they were taking the soldiers that they would capture, and they would bring these trees down, and they'd tie a leg to each one and then let them go, and they'd split the person in half, and you'd see them flying. And they would show this on the screen, you know, what was actually happening, these horrible things they did to the people. And in Germany, they were showing how they would take the Jewish people, especially Jewish people, put them in train cars, box cars, and by the boxcar load, they would, like they were cattle, take them to an area where they had this big dome building, and they would put them in there, and then they would turn the gas on. And as the people were fighting to have air, the ones that died down here, they would climb, and they'd keep climbing and climbing on top of each other, trying to stay out of the gas, you know, so they could breathe. And the Germans thought it was just hilarious that when they would open up the building, here the people were like a haystack of people that were dead from being gassed. And they would, it was just terrible. The things that they did was just so inhuman. It was awful. Very frightening, but they at least kept us informed. We got to see the actual things that were happening, and it was very bad. But anyway, during the war, if you had good grades in high school, even though you weren't old enough yet to really be working in a factory, they let you work because they were so short of help to make all of this equipment that they needed for the two wars. And so they would let you work in there. And so I worked at the Burgess Norton plant part-time, and we had to have uniforms on. It was a blue uniform that was like a jumpsuit. You put it on, it was just one piece. And you had to have an identification badge on. And they had a guard at the door because they had to make sure that there were no enemies coming in and sabotaging us. And but I worked part-time there, and then they had what they called the Geneva Modern Kitchen that used to make kitchen cabinets and things like that for the kitchens. And they turned that into a war plant also, where they welded ammunition boxes to keep the ammunition dry for the soldiers. And so I worked part-time there too. So I welded ammunition boxes, and I helped with the tank parts at Burgess Norton. And they had there was a wonderful black woman that sort of took me under her wing, and they had what they called piecework. You got paid by how many pieces of things you put out. And these tank parts were like little tubes of metal about so long. And you would have to put like a paint that was a glue, actually, of some kind. You painted that in there, and then you pounded a metal plug in, and each end of it. And then they would put those into the hot furnaces and make them hard steel. But they didn't want it inside, so that's why the plugs had to be in. And so this lady and I would work together. She requested me because we could put out a lot of them. And so I would paint and she would plug. And then we'd do that for an hour, and then we'd switch. And I would plug and she would paint. And we thought it was fantastic money. We made 50 cents an hour. And we thought that was just really wonderful. We were wealthy. But one day I wanted to go to a movie with my friends. So I called in and said that I was sick, and I went to the movie. And when I came out of the movie, here was the guard sitting there waiting for me, and he had me to get in the car, and he took me home to get into my uniform and took me to work. Because they were so short of help, and he made it very well known that I should be very ashamed of myself because I was cheating on getting these parts that the soldiers needed, and they would be killed because I didn't show up to do the work that I was supposed to do. And I can remember crying because I felt so bad that I had done such a bad thing. But anyway, that was during the war. That was the way it was. And we had rationing of especially meat and sugar. They were very hard to come by. And so we would be allowed so much per person in a family. And we would have eggs and whatever during the week so we could have a big roast on Sunday. Sunday was a special day. And nylon stockings, silk stockings. People used to wear silk stockings. Well, during the war, we couldn't get silk stockings because they had to have the silk for parachutes for the soldiers. So therefore, nylon was invented, and they had nylon stockings. And I think to this day they have nylon stockings, if I'm not mistaken. But anyway, there was good and bad from everything. And of course, there was no electricity, no electric refrigerators. They had ice boxes. and we thought the icebox was a wonderful invention. And the ice would go in the top of there was a container at the top of your ice refrigerator for the ice. And they had a sign that you'd put in your window, either 10, 20, 30, or 40 pounds. And the one that was at the top, the right way, was let the man know how much ice you needed. And then he would take an ice pick and pick off the 10 pounds or whatever you needed. And then they had these clamps of ice tongs that would pick it up, and he'd bring it in and put it in your ice box. And of course, we worked the swing shift during the war. You would work 1 week 7 to 3, and then you'd work 3 to 11, and then you had a week of 11 to 7. And so there was people working around the clock at the plant. And they came out with a song about, "Milkman, keep those bottles quiet. I've been working on the swing shift all night." And I don't remember the rest of it, but anyway, they had that song. And the men were so tired when they went into the military. They were very young. Most of them were just out of high school. And they were so tired, and they made up a song that us kids thought was great. And it was, let's see, let me think just a minute here. Oh goodness! Sometimes when I'm trying to think of something, it's not there, and when I get through talking, it's there.
Yeah.
It's just very slow. It's like I'm in slow gear.
I think you're amazing.
But oh goodness sakes! Well, I'll just skip that.
Yeah, if you think of it, just go for it. What comes to your mind?
But anyway, when the war was over, it was great. And then the day that my husband was discharged from the service and came home, I was working at the Grand Quist upholstery shop with my mother, and Buster's mother worked there too. And he came to see her, and I met him, and we did. He tried to get me to date him, but I don't know. I for some reason was just a little bit leery about going on a date with him, and I kept refusing. So for about a year or more, I refused to go out with him, and finally I did go out with him, and we had a great time. And he loved going for picnic breakfasts, and we'd go out to Johnson's Mound, and he would build a fire, and he'd make coffee in a can and with the grounds in it, you know, and just boil the water, and that was some coffee, and fry eggs and things, and we had such a good time. And so in 1948 we got married. It was 72 years ago, and we had a wonderful life, and we were active in the American Legion. And the Legion Hall at that time that we got married, you went in a door that was right next to the Venetian Cafe, and it was upstairs is where they had the American Legion Hall at that time. Later on, they built a new building that was right next to the library, which then later on they sold that to the library, and they moved into Skoglund's funeral home. And Skoglund's funeral home moved out into St. Charles, as I understand. And so there were so many changes. And I can remember when right next to the Little Owl, there was a shoe store. I kind of have forgotten what they called it, but the shoes were in the back of the store. And they had all kinds of other things there, but his daughter then or opened up the Merrill Lee shop. Simon, I think, was their last name. And she opened the Merrill Lee shop, which is now a jewelry store, I think. And the Geneva Hotel is gone. And they did make a movie there after the hotel had closed down.
Did you ever stay in the
It was
hotel?
about a gangster that came there. But anyway,
Did you ever stay at the hotel?
pardon me?
Did you ever stay at the hotel?
No, I never did, but I was friends with the elderly ladies that ran the Geneva Hotel. And so I was there and went into many of the rooms with them and things, you know, but I never actually stayed there. But it was a nice little hotel. But anyway, then I think the thing that I really was heartbroken when they tore it down, and that was the church that was on the corner of the right from the theater. It was right on the corner, and there was a bunch of steps that went up to the church, and oh, I thought it was just the most beautiful church. I was just heartbroken when they tore that down. And the other thing that I really felt bad about was the train depot. They used to have a roof that went out from the depot, and there was brick underneath, a brick patio, like a patio. And they had the old-fashioned cart that they used to pull the cart over to unload luggage and things on, and the cart stayed outside there. And it was, to me, this was just part of the past that was just great. And then they tore that all down and got rid of that, and I was very, very upset about that. I just truly loved that other depot. Too bad they didn't fix it up and just keep it, you know.
I agree.
But I think that was before the Historical Society started stepping in. But we did have my husband's grandmother's house is a historical marker. And they have a plate on the front of the house so that it cannot be destroyed.
What street is that on?
Pardon me?
Do you know what street that one's on?
Yes, it's on the corner of 2nd and Ford.
Okay.
And they did remodel. They can't tear the house down, but they can remodel. And they've added a lot. I mean, it's all, the garage, the little garage that was out and back is gone and stuff. But I still remember the house so well because when our first baby was born, Grandma Browne was still living. His Grandma Browne was still living. And we went right from the hospital over to let Grandma Browne see the baby. And my husband came carrying the baby in, and Grandma laughed and she said, "I just can't believe that little Buster is carrying a baby like he's done it all his life." But you came in and there was a parlor. They had the parlor, which was for like when you had guests, and you kept the parlor neat and clean, and you know, I mean, it was perfect all the time because you had company come in there. Then you had the family room, which was where you did your living. And that was off to the left as you went in. And then the kitchen was out in the back. And Grandma Browne had a man from Greece that lived with them. I can't recall what his name was, but he did a lot of cooking with garlic and oil and, you know, that type of thing. And the house smelled like onions and garlic most of the time because this guy loved to do the cooking. And Grandma, bless her heart, she just let him do what he wanted to do. She was a sweet little lady. But, and my husband's mother's mother was still living also on the east side of town. they were Johnsons, the Johnsons, and they lived upstairs. It was across from the mill race, and I can remember seeing her there. But the mill race is gone now too, and the mill race inn is gone. That was quite a popular restaurant, and it was down by the river, and they would have a container, and when there was dinner rolls left at a table, instead of throwing them away, they put them in this container out by near the door, and people could take it and go out and feed the ducks. And it was really fun, because sometimes one of the ducks would get a big piece of bread, and the others would all try to get it away from him, and they would, be fighting over the bread and stuff. Children especially just loved going to the mill races and feeding the ducks. Some of them wouldn't even go there to eat. They would just go in and get some bread and feed the ducks. But when they were going to tear down the mill race, Richard went down and got me a brick that they had, and I took that brick and I made a cover for it, and I painted the bridge and the mill race here in the bridge with the water, and I covered that brick with that covering, and I gave it to Mike. Mike has it now, and but those are nice memories, really. And of course, my family got involved in the canoes and was in the canoe race. Do they still have the canoe races?
I think so, just not this year, but they usually do.
But, well, I think right now everything is kind of havoc because of this crazy virus, You just can't do anything that you used to do. It's really changed our entire world, but as we knew it. But I can remember that my grandparents, they had, for a telephone, it was a party line, and there would be 6 and 8 families all on one party line. And I can remember my grandmother's was a short, long, and 2 shorts. And then a short, long, and a short was us. and everybody they would hear the ring, and they'd say, "Oh, that's so-and-so. I wonder what she's going to talk about." So they'd go and sometimes everybody was talking and talking together, and nobody had anything private with the phone, because there was always somebody listening in. And when we built our house, Buster and I got married, we lived in Otto Nagel's little house. It was right across from the Macaulay greenhouse. That's gone too. But Macaulay's greenhouse was there, and we lived right across. It had been built. It was like actually a 2-car garage, I think, and they made it into a little house with a bathroom and everything. And that's where we rented until I heard that the lot was for sale on the corner of Cheevers and Western. And so Buster's dad told me that he would loan me the money to buy the lot if I wanted to buy it. And Buster said, "No, we'll never have enough money to build a house. There's no need buying a lot." Well, I went ahead and bought it and paid Grandpa back for it. And it was only $1,250 for that. I think it was like 100 by 200 and something lot on the corner. And so then we saved up for building. And my husband said, "We're not going to build. We can't afford it. We don't have any money." So, determination, I went to the St. Charles Savings and Loan Office and talked with them and told them that, is there any way at all that I can get a loan and pay it off as we work? And so they came up with what they called an open-end loan. And I would just borrow enough money to like build a basement. And I would keep working and paying that off. And then I'd take out another little loan for a certain amount of the equipment we needed. And my husband and I built a house. And he was a carpenter that was his job, being a carpenter. And he had served his apprenticeship and became a full-fledged carpenter and belonged to the union. And so I would be working with them, and the men would kid him about if I belonged to the union, because he would make a jig for me, and I would take the power saw and cut all the rafters and all, things like that. And I was there working, and I worked at Burgess Norton at night. I worked the night shift because that way I could take care of my children and help with the building of the house and still bring in money. But anyway, we got our house built, and that's where we raised our family. And it was a wonderful place because there was a park right across the street, and they built a swimming pool across the railroad tracks. And later on, they put it across the street in what had been a cornfield before. They built the new swimming pool there. And during the war, when the women were working at Burgess Norton, Mr. Burgess had that house that's on the corner of Cheevers and South Street. Western Avenue and South Street. There's a building there, and that was what they used for a nursery for anybody that worked in the war plant could have their children at the daycare. Well, actually, it was around the clock because of the swing shift, and so they had that for the children care. But and later on, it was used for. After the war, it was used for things like, when I was a Girl Scout leader, we could hold our Girl Scout meetings there and things like that. But it was very nice. And then 6th Street School, my children went to 6th Street School, which they turned into some kind of a courthouse, part of the courthouse. I don't remember. I think they have the divorces and things like that at that one. I'm not sure. But they built Western Avenue School, and my kids went to Western Avenue School. And so anyway, we raised our children, and they had the high school there and everything. When I was probably about 16, I think, 16 years old, my grandfather had heart failure and was very ill, and my mother and I went to take care of him until he passed away. And in those days, they didn't have hospital beds and things like that, so we had a chair that they made into a commode, and he just stayed on there all the time because he couldn't get out of bed or anything. And he preferred to be sitting up rather than lying down because he couldn't breathe otherwise. And it was a very sad thing. I would work taking care of him during the day for a week, and my mother would have the night shift, and then we'd switch. And I would hear Grandpa in there, sounded like he was pounding something, and I'd think, well, what is he doing? And I'd take a look, and of course he realized I was peeking at him, and he'd quit, what was happening was his hands were going numb, and he was trying to pound some circulation into them. And he just, his body just, finally, the swelling choked him to death. It was very sad. But anyway, it made me realize that I wanted to help sick people. And so when I got back to Geneva, I went to the hospital, and Mrs. Harding was the superintendent of the hospital at the time. And I went in and talked to her, and I said, is there any way that I could find out if the doctors have anyone in their homes that need to be taken care of, that need help? I said I took care of my grandfather, and I realized I would like to help people. And she said, well, Geneva, she said, we need you right here at the hospital. Well, I panicked. I've never even been in a hospital. Oh, no, I could never do that. And she said, yes, you could. She said, you know, this used to be, Geneva Hospital used to be a nurse's training school. And she said, we still have 2 nurses here that are still working that were trained right here in Geneva. And she said, I will have you assigned to her, and she will teach you what you need to know. Well, I had nurses training without having to pay for nurses training, because this lady took me under her wing, and it was amazing the things that she taught me to do. And in fact, as the years went on, I worked there for 35 years. And as the years went on, the nurses that would come out of nurses training didn't know how to do some of the things. They had had the book learning, but they hadn't had the on-the-job training. And so they would come to me and have me teach them. And I thought, I used to kind of laugh about it, because here they were the ones that got the RN, and they had gone to school, and I was teaching them how to do something. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed my life very much. And then the last, I think, 5 years that I worked at the hospital, I was in their home care division. They started having home care. And Dr. McDonald told me that I was way ahead of my time, because he had a patient that was dying from leukemia. And she was a little southern woman, cutest accent, and she lived out in the Fox River Heights. And her husband had just, his one arm was cut off at the elbow. And so I don't know what he did for a living. I think he probably was on some kind of state aid or something. But anyway, he was not a nice person, and he treated her just terrible. And they had one little boy. And Donnie was, I think maybe he was about 10 or 12, 10 or somewhere in there, a little over 10 years old maybe, when I started going out to take care of her. I asked Dr. McDonald if it was okay, because she'd come in the hospital and she'd be really bad, and oh, she would be in such terrible condition, because she wasn't able to bathe herself or get out of bed, and her husband did not help her at all, and it was just terrible. But anyway, I would take care of her. So I asked Dr. McDonald if it was all right with him if I would go out to her house once a week and give her a bath and change her bed and do the laundry, and stuff like that. And he said, well, you won't get any money for it. And I said, I'm not interested in money. I said, I'm interested in helping this poor little woman to be comfortable. So he said it was okay. So I would take my own sheets and go out there. And when I found out that they had this little boy, I would stop at McDonald's and get him a hamburger and a milkshake, and I would take it out. And no matter where he was at in the neighborhood, when he'd see my car coming, he'd come running to the house as fast as he could. And he just, oh, he loved that. He just really loved that. And he had a guitar that somebody gave him, and he was learning to play that. And his dad decided he was going to go on a fishing trip. And the little boy wanted to go with him, and he told him no, that he had to stay home with his mother. Well, the kid decided that he would just go fishing by himself, so he went to the river to go fishing. And his mother was having trouble, and she started pounding on the window because there was nobody there and she couldn't get out of bed. So she pounded on her window, and finally the neighbor realized something was going on and came over, and they helped her and got an ambulance to bring her to the hospital. And so when his dad come home, he was so mad that he had gone fishing and left his mother with nobody there, that he busted his guitar into smithereens, just crushed it as punishment for that. And that poor little boy. But anyway, I took care of her like that. And she weighed so little, I could pick her up like a child and sit her in a chair while I changed her bed and got it all cleaned. And then I would take those dirty sheets home, and then the next week I'd bring those back and change the bed again. But I did that until she passed away. And then I often wondered about the little boy. Well, one day I turned around, and here was this young man in a sailor suit that came to the hospital to see me. And it was this kid. He had joined the Navy, and he wanted to come and tell me goodbye and thank me for the kindness that I had shown him when he was a child and for taking care of his mother. But the thing that I used to just cringe about was their refrigerator, the bottom drawer that was supposed to be for vegetables. His dad had soil in there and kept his fishing worms in the refrigerator, in the bottom, in the vegetable drawer. Oh man, that used to just make me ill when I would see that. But anyway, it was, I got so that I would, decided that there was so many people that needed help in their homes that I thought I could do more for that than working at the hospital, because the people would have surgery, colostomies and things, and the Medicare would only pay for a few days of nursing care, and then after that they were on their own. Well, they were not able to do that. And there were some that were diabetics that couldn't see to draw up their own insulin, And so I started having, just going to a few that I knew about, and then the word got around that I did that sort of thing. And so I had more people wanting help than I could possibly take care of. But it was kind of nice because I could pick and choose who I wanted to have by just saying that my schedule was full. If there was somebody that I knew was not going to be a good experience taking care of. So I would have a full schedule, and I just couldn't work them in, and that way I didn't have to insult them or in any way. But I did that for, oh goodness, I think about 10 years maybe. I went into homes and took care of them. After my husband passed away, he was a diabetic and did not believe he was diabetic and did not take care of himself, and he ended up with all kinds of health problems and heart problems and had open heart surgery, and was a very sick man, very sick. And finally, I talked him into, it was a winter time, and I talked him into going to California. Our son Doug lived in California, and he'd been wanting us to come and see him. And so I talked my husband into going out to spend some time out there where it was warm, and he could be out of the house a little bit that way. And he passed away out there. And it was a shock to my system, because it never occurred to me that he wouldn't be coming back. And there was a song at the time that was, "Will he ever return? No, he'll never return." And that kept going through my mind. No, he'll never return. And it was a rough time. But anyway, I continued then working, staying nights with some of the elderly that couldn't be left in the house at night in case they needed help or fell or something, you know. And I was always a light sleeper, because when I raised my children, when our first one was little, when Linda was just little, there was a little girl in Chicago. I believe her name was, if I'm not mistaken, it was Degnan. Anyway, this little girl, her mother heard her say, "I gotta get my baby, I gotta get my doll." And she thought that the child was just talking in her sleep, and she didn't get up to investigate. And what had happened was somebody had put a ladder up to her bedroom window and talked her into going with him, and he killed her, and her body parts were found all over Chicago in the sewers and stuff. And that frightened me so bad that any time that I would hear any noise at all in the house, or the kids talking or anything, I would get up and investigate to make sure that my kids were okay. And then there was another incident where there was a baby that was in Chicago also. The baby was crying. Well, I never could understand that, because there's a difference between a painful cry and just a cry. But anyway, the baby was crying, and the mother did not go to check on the baby. She was tired. And when they did check on it, there was some rats in there that had eaten the toes and fingers off of the baby. And so anytime my baby would cry, I was up checking on my baby to make sure nothing like that ever happened to mine. But anyway, I was used to being aware of noises at night, and so consequently it worked out fine, because I could get my rest when they were sleeping, but if they had a problem, I heard it, and I was up to take care of them. And so I worked night and day after my husband died, because I had 2 boys in college. And it seemed like that every time that I thought I was going to be able to afford something that I needed, one of them would need a book that cost $200 or $300, and so there went whatever it was. So it was kind of a tight time, but enjoyable at the same time, because I was doing what I dearly loved, and that was taking care of people. And so one day there was a woman that came and asked me to take care of this one that was dying from cancer. And so she was always very neat and clean, and she liked to keep her hair nice and everything, but she was bedridden and couldn't do it, and she was worrying because her hair looked so bad. So I got my hair beautician to come over, and I put a plastic garbage bag on the foot of the bed and held her head while the beautician gave her a shampoo and we gave her a perm. And oh, she just felt so good, you know, that she got her hair done and she knew she looked nice. So her sister she couldn't believe that I would spend my money to give her sister a perm, you know, and get her fixed up. And so I said, well, I'm really being very selfish because it makes me happy to do these things. It makes me feel so good that, you know, it's really, I'm being selfish by doing these things. But she had this reporter to come and talk to me, and I have a newspaper page that she wrote an article. It says, giving that something extra. And she wrote this article about me and all these things that I had done. And I saved it because I was so thrilled that somebody thought it was worth putting in the newspaper. And then another time, after we had built our house, when they did some kind of construction, the drainage came down and drained right into our backyard. There was a culvert under our driveway, and it would put all the water into our backyard. And we were having an awful time with flooding all on Cheevers Avenue. And so I had requested that they do something about it. Well, of course, nobody did anything about it. So I decided I was going to get a petition. So we were going to the American Legion Hall for something that night. And so I took this paper and I wrote something about that the city needed to do something about the flooding of Cheevers Avenue and Cheevers and Western. And I had everybody to sign it, and I forget how many hundred signatures I had. Of course, everybody was signing. And so consequently, the mayor and our alderman came and had me to come out on the street corner, and they had a newspaper person there to take our picture, standing on the street corner, getting the signatures, and he's telling me what they're going to do to correct our drainage problem. And they did do it, but they also put an article in the paper, and they put a Noah's Ark ship in our front yard. And had that in the paper, you know, and here it says Cheevers and Western sign, and here's the Ark out at our house. It was really funny. I thought that was such a funny article. But I also had some of these cards. These here were some cards that they made for a fundraiser when I was working at the hospital. And it has a picture of the hospital. An artist drew that, and they had the different colors of stationery, and they sold them. And I had some stationery, and I've got 2 of them left, a yellow one and a pink one. And I'm going to give those to you for the society because I think it's something that maybe you would like to have.
Thank you.
But I used them in many ways. One was that I used it for I took a copy of it on a piece of paper and used it as like stationery to write poems and things. I used to write poems about people. And one of the poems that I wrote was my neighbor, June Glazer, was going to be the president of the Young Mothers Club. So they came to me and asked me if I would write a poem about June. And I can't remember all the poem, but I remember she had colitis, and so one of the things I had was, it's not a new dance, I kid you not, this thing we call the colitis trot. And then there was another verse in there. And they had somebody, when they had the program, they had unrolled toilet paper, and the woman ran across the stage with this toilet paper flying, you know, when they read that one at the podium. And there was, June always loved her Pepsi Cola. And in fact, she drank so much of it that she had the Pepsi people to deliver by the cases in her garage. Because from morning till night, that girl had Pepsi. It was just, I never saw anybody drink so much Pepsi. But anyway, she liked maraschino cherries in it. And so one of the verses was, a Pepsi makes her very happy. Drinking Pepsi makes her merry, especially if it's loaded with a maraschino cherry. And so they threaded some maraschino cherries, and they had this big tall glass of Pepsi, and they had these maraschino cherries. And when they read that verse, they took it in there, these cherries. But anyway, they had their whole program around the fact that this poem about her. And then my mother had never had a party, even when she got married. They just got married at a with a preacher, and then they went back to work at the farm, you know. And so she never had a birthday party or anything. And she said if she got the shingles, and she was just sure she was going to die, and they were very painful. But she did get over it, and she did have her 80th birthday, so she had her party. And we held it at the Moose Lodge. And I wrote a story, a poem about her life. Would you like to hear it?
I'd love to.
Okay, it says, as I reflect into the past, these are memories that seem to last. A little girl was making mud pies when, getting cleaned up, saw tears in her father's eyes. Though you are young, little girl, hear what I say. Your poor sick mother has passed away. Another good woman he took for a wife, and was the girl's mother the rest of her life. The girl went to school through grade 8, worked hard on the farm from early till late. She did the cooking, milking, baking the bread, helped care for the 7 kids and put them to bed. She helped squeeze juice from sugar cane with a press, pulled by horses that walked in circles all the while. Residue was called a pumice pile. The juice was guided through lanes and heated as it passes. At the line it became sorghum molasses. A young girl now picked one boy from the bunch she hoped and prayed would buy her box lunch. Another outbid him, and she was so sad that she wouldn't sit with the winner. She was so mad. She won her prize when it came to mate. She won her prize when it came to mating. She married her true love, Herbert Clayton. They raised 8 children, 7 girls and a boy, enough to make anyone's patience destroy. They moved from school to school and farm to farm to feed and care for their children, but it did no one harm. For a while, they took gravel from the riverbed. The kids made mudslides into the water, more fun than a sled. Always when illness or poverty hit, one thing or the other, Thomas was there, her own little brother. Depression came and no jobs could be had. So it was in WPA, relief food, and relief foods. Times were real bad. She made her own soap using lye and lard, scrubbing clothes on a board and hung them in the yard. Then they moved to a city several miles up north. The factory paid more money and things were better henceforth. They bought a nice house and time quickly passed. The kids grew up and married and burdens lessened at last. Her aging father got sick and till the end needed care. The girl and her daughter were glad to be there. The good deed put no money into their purse, but the daughter spent her life being a nurse. Then came the sad and miserable day. The good Lord took her husband away. She kept on working, although in a daze, because she still had 3 little children to raise. Her mother came for a few weeks' stay before she got sick and passed away. The visit was worth the effort it took. Her mother mentioned it when later she wrote a book. She sold her house to one daughter and lived with another. The girls are all glad to take turns with their mother. She never thought that she would visit a land across the sea, but 2 of her girls and she did visit Hawaii. She spends winters in Florida and up north in the spring. She sees all of her kids and goes to family reunions and everything. For her both birthday, she has planned this wonderful party. So please enjoy yourselves and everyone eat hearty. The poem I've written is about none other than my 80-year-old wonderful mother. I'm sure you know without any waiting. Her name is, of course, our own Ethel Clayton. That I had for my mom.
That's sweet.
And this is a sign that I just loved, and I hung this on my door for a long time. It says, "When I die, I want to go peacefully like my grandfather did, in his sleep, not screaming like the other passengers in his car."
Nice.
And I just loved that one, and so I hung that on my door when I was in Moose Haven when I was retired. But
I love it.
But when I was in Moose Haven, I always get myself busy. After I quit working as a home nurse, I worked at Campana factory as their first aid nurse, and they decided that they would like to have once a month have a newspaper. So I was the editor, and I wrote a newspaper. I made puzzles, and I wrote went around and got all the information from different ones about what was going on in their lives, and I would put it in the newspaper. And this was one of the newspapers that I had made, and I kept one copy. and this is a Super Bowl book. When I was in Florida at the Moose Haven retirement place, the local newspaper came out they were going to have the very first Super Bowl. They had never had a Super Bowl before. And so they came out with this book, and they gave everybody a copy of it. The first Super Bowl was January the 15th of 1967. That was the very first Super Bowl. Green Bay Packers and Kansas City. Green Bay won 35-10. And they have a little, on each month, they have each year, they have a remember these things, and they have all kinds of little information that happened that year. The second Super Bowl was Green Bay and Oakland, and Green Bay won again, 33-14. And let's see, I forget how far it was before the Chicago. There's Oakland and Minnesota, Dallas and Denver, Pittsburgh.
Are you a Bears fan or Packers?
Here we are, Chicago. Chicago Bears played New England, and they won 46-10. It was January of 1986. And it was Super Bowl 20, I think. Yeah, Super Bowl XX 20.
Are you a Bears fan or a Packers fan?
So, anyway, and so I have kept track of every Super Bowl since the very first one, because this book left off with New England and Carolina in 38, the 38th Super Bowl. And I've kept track of all of them since then on a piece of paper. So I have every Super Bowl's teams and their scores from the very first Super Bowl.
Nice.
So anyway, that's pretty much my life up till now. And I live in Texas during the winter with my son and his family. And I come to Illinois for the summer. And up until this year, I always came in May, and we'd go to the memorial service and the pancake breakfast. But this year, because of the virus, everything has changed, and I didn't get to come until later, so I missed a lot of things. But they didn't have the program anyway because of the virus, so I didn't really miss out on anything.
No, you didn't.
So, well, thank you very much, and it's been fun, and I've talked your leg off, so I'll quit.
It was awesome. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Tell me about your wedding. What church? Was it a church?
Yes.